Number one, he said the coronavirus would go away without a vaccine. You bought it, but he didn't. While other countries got the pandemic under control and avoided large numbers of fatalities, the virus has killed more than 170,000 Americans, and that number is still climbing. Number two, he said he won't have time to play golf if elected president, but he's made more than 250 visits to his golf club since he took office, a record for any president, including more trips during the pandemic than meetings with Dr. Fauci. The total financial cost to America, more than $136 million. Number three, he said he would repeal the Affordable Care Act and replace it with something beautiful.
So we're going to do repeal and replace. Very complicated stuff.
It didn't happen. Instead, 7 million Americans have lost their health insurance since he took office. He's asked the Supreme Court to strike down the law in the middle of a global pandemic, with no plan to replace it. Number four, he said he'd cut your taxes and that the super rich like him would pay more. He did the opposite. By 2027, the richest 1% will have received 83% of the Trump tax cut, and the richest 0.1%, 60% of it. But more than half of all Americans will pay more in taxes. Number five, he said corporations would use their tax cuts to invest in American workers. They didn't. Corporations spent more of their tax savings buying back shares of their own stock than increasing workers' wages. Number six, he said he would boost economic growth by 4% a year. Nope. The economy stalled. Unemployment has soared to the highest level since the Great Depression. Just over half of working-age Americans are employed, the worst ratio in 70 years. Number seven, he said,
I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
His latest budget includes billions in cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Number eight, he promised to be the voice of American workers.
I am your voice.
He hasn't. His administration has stripped workers of their rights, repealed overtime protections, rolled back workplace safety rules, and turned a blind eye to employers who steal their workers' wages. Number nine, he promised that the average American family would see a $4,000 pay raise because of his tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, but nothing trickled down. Wages for most Americans have barely kept up with inflation. Number 10, he promised that anyone who wants a test for COVID will get one. But countless Americans still can't get a test for COVID. Number 11, he said hydroxychloroquine protects against coronavirus. It doesn't. The FDA revoked its emergency authorization due to the drug's potentially lethal side effects. Number 12, he promised to eliminate the federal deficit. He has increased the federal deficit by more than 60%. Number 13, he said he would hire only the best people. He has fired a record number of his own cabinet and White House picks, and then called them wackos, dumb as a rock, and not mentally qualified. 6 of them have been charged with crimes. Number 14, he promised to bring down the price of prescription drugs and said,
Our drug industry has been disastrous. They're getting away with murder.
They still are. Drug prices have soared, and a company that got federal funds to develop a drug to treat coronavirus is charging $3,000 a pop. Number 15, he promised to revive the struggling coal industry and bring back lost coal mining jobs. The coal industry has continued to lose jobs as clean energy becomes cheaper. Number 16, he promised to help American workers during the pandemic, but 80% of the tax benefits in the coronavirus stimulus package have gone to millionaires and billionaires, and at least 21 million Americans have lost extra unemployment benefits, with no new stimulus check to fall back on. Number 17, he said he'd drain the swamp. Instead, he's brought into his administration more billionaires, CEOs, and Wall Street moguls than in any administration in history. And he's filled departments and agencies with former lobbyists, lawyers, and consultants who are crafting new policies for the same industries they used to work for. Number 18, he promised to protect Americans with pre-existing conditions.
Pre-existing conditions are in the bill, and I mandated. I said it has to be.
His Justice Department is trying to repeal the entire Affordable Care Act, including protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Number 19, he said Mexico would pay for his border wall. The wall is estimated to cost American taxpayers $11 billion. Number 20, he promised to bring peace to the Middle East. Instead, tensions have increased, and his so-called peace plan was dead on arrival. Number 21, he promised to lock up Hillary Clinton for using a private email server. He didn't. Funny enough, Trump uses his personal cell phone for official business, and several members of his own administration, including Jared Kushner and Ivanka, have used private email in the White House. Number 22, he promised to use his business experience to whip the federal government into shape. He hasn't. His White House is in permanent chaos. He caused the longest government shutdown in our nation's history when he didn't get funding for his wall. Number 23, he promised to end DACA. The Supreme Court ruled that his plan to deport 700,000 young immigrants was unconstitutional, and DACA still stands. Number 24, he promised 6 weeks of paid maternity leave
to any mother with a newborn child whose employer does not provide the benefit.
He hasn't delivered. Number 25, he promised to bring an end to Kim Jong-un's nuclear program. Kim is expanding North Korea's nuclear program. Number 26, he said he would distance himself from his businesses while in office. He continues to make money from his properties and maintain his grip on his real estate empire. Number 27, he said he'd force companies to keep jobs in America.
There will be a major border tax on these companies that are leaving.
Since he took office, companies like GE, Carrier, Ford, and Harley-Davidson have continued to outsource thousands of jobs while still receiving massive tax breaks. And offshoring by federal contractors has increased. Number 28, he promised to end the opioid crisis. Americans are now more likely to die from an opioid overdose than a car accident. Number 29, he said he'd release his tax returns. It's been nearly 4 years. He has not released his tax returns. Number 30, he promised to tear up the Iran nuclear deal and renegotiate a better one. Negotiations have gone nowhere, and he brought us to the brink of war. Number 31, he promised to enact term limits for all members of Congress. He's not even tried to enact term limits. Number 32, he promised that China would pay for tariffs on imported goods. His trade war has cost U.S. consumers $34 billion a year, eliminated 300,000 American jobs, and cost American taxpayers $22 billion in subsidies for farmers hurt by the tariffs. Number 33, he promised to push colleges to cut the skyrocketing costs of tuition. Instead, he's made it easier for for-profit colleges to defraud students, and tuition is still rising. Number 34, he promised to protect American steel jobs. The steel industry continues to lose jobs. Number 35, he promised tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations would spur economic growth and pay for themselves. His tax cuts will add $2 trillion to the federal deficit. Number 36, after pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, he said he'd negotiate a better deal on the environment. He hasn't attempted to negotiate any deal. Number 37, he promised that the many women who accused him of sexual misconduct, quote, will be sued after the election is over. He hasn't sued them, presumably because he doesn't want the truth to come out. Number 38, he promised to bring back all troops from Afghanistan. He now says, we'll always have somebody there. Number 39, he pledged to put America first. Instead, he's deferred to dictators and authoritarians at America's expense and ostracized our allies who now laugh at us behind our back. Number 40, he promised to be the voice of the common people.